Sounds good. Yep, there we go. And then I'm going to share my screen so we can look at the same things together. So see if I can find what I'm looking for here. Is that? Okay. Does everyone see my screen? It's coming? It's loading? There we go. Okay. Does everyone see that? All right. Well, welcome everyone. Yes, today we are going to talk about the stress in junior year and really why that seems to be different from previous years. We're going to talk about the components of stress and how that may be impacting your child and you this year, and why it seems to be arising. We'll talk about the impact of last year a little bit and how that may have changed what is the norm for juniors, and for those of you who have older siblings wondering what's going on, and then how to approach various situations that arise. So we're hoping this is a little bit interactive and you'll join in the chat to talk to us about what you're seeing, and we'll take, and then go and we can have a conversation. So much easier when we're in person, that conversation piece, but we'll give it our best effort today. Let me see if I can get this working. Okay, so let's start with you as parents in the beginning here. Perhaps you can tell us what are some of the causes of stress that you're seeing in your juniors this year. What kinds of factors, what kinds of situations, what is happening in your household that you can see that seems to be causing a lot of stress? I'll give you a few minutes to tell us what that looks like. Wait, let me go back.
So I'm just going to respond as they come in. I'm seeing standardized tests causing anxiety, of course. No time for chit chat, enormous amounts of homework, grade expectations. Not great, but grade, yes. Absolutely. All of that, right? A lot of pressure in junior year. GPA, kids are really worried about those college apps. So all of this intensifies. Increased workload and pressure regarding GPA. Yeah. So it does raise the stress levels in a different way in junior year. Juggling sports and work, right? Again, kids have a lot going on. So that's a tough juggle. Absolutely.
Yeah, those are good ones.
Yeah.
Anything else, Susan?
I think that covers the PSAT in the junior year, right? Many other towns, someone's noting, actually start in the freshman year. And that pressure to get into college is coming up again. GPA testing, peer comparisons. We're going to talk a little bit about that. That's a really tough one, right? And as my friend Eileen Donlin says, kids go to Comparisonville, and sometimes parents are going to talk about that. So great. Thank you so much for that input. Those covers a lot, right, Cindy, in terms of the stressors that people are seeing.
It sure does. And you've hit the nail on the head. We are absolutely facing those kinds of situations. And things are changing in terms of your relationship with your child. They may be driving now, so you're not getting that time in the car, which to me was always so precious, to hear what's going on in the back seat with their friends as they're chatting, to kind of get a pulse on what's happening. Those drives in the car to me were the most valuable thing that ever happened. They may be, they're at a stage in their life that they should be more independent, and they may be dating, and they may be engaging in behaviors they're not comfortable talking to you about. So you may start to feel them feeling more removed from you. So you're not having that connection like you normally may have. Absolutely. It's time for college and career stuff. It's time to start planning and getting organized. And many of the programs the counselors are doing this year will address that, but they're also afraid, and they may not feel ready. And so you might be getting pushback. They're not ready to talk about it because there's such anxiety around it. Their life is changing. We're talking about their life changing significantly in the next couple of years. And that's an unsafe place for them, to think about leaving home and what's next. They may want to leave home on some days, but certainly there are times that this is such a scary option because they can't see where they are going next year, in 2 years. They can't see it where it is. So it's that unknown. Preparing for standardized testing, you're adding test prep classes, you're adding driving lessons, so their schedules are busier. And as I said, they are becoming more independent. But with the pandemic, some things have changed. We saw, developmentally, we've seen these kids on one hand, it's slowed down a little bit because last year and a half, they've been home more. They've been your babies in a lot of ways again, because they've been reconnecting with you. But now we're turning it back onto, okay, now the normal is for you to be shifting back to this stage of development where you're leaving. So there might be a raised level of stress and anxiety because now we're shifting back, we're pivoting, we're moving back towards, okay, it's that time in your life, but we may have just delayed it by a year because of the pandemic. So there is a lot going on for them. That reliance on social media really took an uptick last year. And we don't see that, that's now become an issue that they're so reliant on it. So much more is going into what they're hearing and seeing and talking about that you are not part of. So it's a tough year normally and tougher this year. So sorry about that, but we are here to really work with you on it. You do need to be flexible and shift your thinking and kind of go with the flow with how this happens. But hopefully it will, as the year goes on, start to fall into place for you and come back to that new normal. We're also seeing, always there's stress-inducing myths about college admissions that kids feel. And then, then we're always working to have them calm down about it or not feel that way. I have to get all good grades or life is over. That if I don't get in all A's, I can't get into that school I want to get into. And if I don't get into that certain college, I have no future, or a college that everyone's heard about. So everybody, when you talk about, going to a certain school, the neighbors will be happy for you, the relatives will be happy, or whatever. They're hearing from everybody, and that raises their anxiety because if they find a school they like, but nobody else goes there, that adds more stress for them. The more selective a college is, the better, that must be a better school to go to. And that we always have to reflect on that. It's better for whom? You may have a child who, being at the top of their game in a class and feeling like one of the leaders is a good place for them. But going to an incredibly selective school where they're just average may be significant for them. That may be hard for them to handle that. And so you will be taking that into account as you're looking at schools. Where are they comfortable? And maybe that most selective school that wants to take them may not be the best place for them. So these are all conversations that are coming up for them. SATs and ACT scores, those are so important. Well, they really haven't been important the last 2 years. 40% of the students never submitted scores last year and got into pretty selective colleges still. So that is something we can take the pressure off. Yes, we'd like kids to sit for them so we can see how they're doing, prep for them to some degree to see where they're going to land, but it isn't a make or break thing as it used to be. Colleges are really trying to walk away from the importance of those scores and realizing they don't mean much in terms of a student's success in college. And then finally, it's gotten more competitive. People are hearing that the applications were up last year, and what does that mean for my child? And really, for us, what we realized, we saw, yes, kids were applying to more what we call reach schools. They were shooting higher, thinking if I don't have scores, I can go to a higher level school. And it didn't really pan out that way. The kids who we normally expect to get into those really selective schools got into them. The ones who got into those schools that accept sort of those B average kids got into those same schools again. So that's to be seen how that will pan out this year. But I don't see that it's more competitive.
So one of the things, just as we start to think about stress, we know about adolescents, although they're in, many of them in these big bodies. I think of my now 21-year-old son. It's hard to remember that their brains are not fully developed. I know you've heard that before, really until the age of 25. And because of that, they don't always have the same coping skills for regulating emotion, and stress can be expressed in so many different ways. So it's good to just remember that sometimes it comes in different forms, right? They're stressed out, they may start to be more oppositional. They may be more needy or clingy, depending on the kind of kid you have. Certainly, sometimes we see them get a little more withdrawn in their bedrooms with the door closed. Being easily frustrated by a small thing, just simply asking them to take the trash out can turn into a major issue. Procrastination also can be stress related, and sometimes we forget about that, but it's avoidance at the core. And so when there's a lot of avoidance and procrastination, often stress is fueling that. So good to slow down and have a conversation about what they might be afraid of and having difficulty with. And of course, we know physical symptoms like headaches and stomach aches, sometimes for some kids who don't yet have the language to really express how they're feeling, can be the way that they communicate that they're having a rough time. They may need more control over things and be arguing more about what they need to have control over, because much in their life right now can feel like it's not in their control, right? Where they're going, what career, it can be very overwhelming. So just to remember that behavior is communication. It's the way kids communicate, often more than language, and it's still our role to help them to put things into words. That's part of all the emotional intelligence work that we do throughout the district, that idea of name it to tame it. But stress can come in many forms. So just trying to help kids to put words to those things. And we know, of course, there's good stress and bad stress, right? The good stress really helps us to prepare for challenges. It's our body's way of preparing. And sometimes talking to kids about it that way can be helpful. There's a lot of research that when we focus too much on the negative parts of stress, that actually stresses people out more. So having that positive perspective on stress is a good thing. It is how our bodies prepare for challenges. And manageable amounts of stress are actually really helpful for growth and development and resilience. And we know time and time again that this is how kids build the ability to problem solve, is that they deal with stress. And that's important because, and I can say, as a parent myself, I was certainly guilty. Sometimes I would just be a little over involved or solving too many problems. It's so important to let the kids solve their own problems. And we'll talk about that more. But when we don't do that, we aren't preparing them for when they are going to be off on their own. So junior year is a perfect time to start stepping back, letting them deal with whatever it is, friend issues with a teacher, have them advocate for themselves, have them go to a counselor. And kids are reluctant, and we're seeing it actually more right now. I think it's kind of a COVID sequelae and something that's coming up after COVID, that they have trouble going to adults to ask for help. That's so important for their resilience and success in college and career, that they're able to solve those problems. We know bad stress, that's okay. And then we think about the times when the system's overwhelmed. Maybe it's too much stress for your child if it's interfering with their ability to perform tasks rather than helping them to prepare. And that difficulty thinking and planning, the fight or flight responses of completely avoiding or being stressed out and angry all the time. Then we're into some other levels of stress that they might want to seek out some assistance from a college, their school counselor at school. And yes, it also leads to negative, symptoms. We know that about stress and mental health issues as well. Next. So at this point, we're going to try to shift a little bit to talk about strategies. We've kind of given a big overview of what stress looks like in the junior year. And I'm going to turn it over to Eileen to start us off.
You're on. Handing it over to Eileen just as she takes a sip of her tea. Excuse me. So the one of the strategies that oftentimes gets overlooked, especially when life causes us to need to pivot to many different stressors, excuse me, such as the the COVID pandemic, is to really take a look at our own levels of stress first, and to take a pulse on how our feelings and thoughts are affecting our relationships with our children. Excuse me. One of the ways of doing that is, as you'll see at the bottom of the screen, there's a four different squares, and that is what they've used to teach social emotional learning throughout the district. And Susan Bliss has been really in the forefront of making sure kids have a way to tune into how they're feeling, and to have an ability to name it, to tame it, if you will, to kind of look at those four different quadrants and think about, what they're feeling in the moment. I think as parents, sometimes when we have kids who are experiencing negative emotions, we are quick to reassure them and problem solve for them and jump in. But I think it's important as kids get older that instead of doing it for them, that we really start to reflect for them and model ways of normalizing how they're feeling, that being mad and sad is just as valid as being brave and calm. And that it's important to state that all feelings are understandable and are experienced by everyone. It's important to practice empathy. And I know when, as a parent, sometimes we're in our own sources of stressors and experiencing high volumes of things going on in our own lives, that it's hard to be empathetic, because our minds are prone to be more rational thinkers, whereas our children's minds are more prone to be in the emotional state. So just hitting that pause button, being able to state, I can see how you may feel that way, or that must be really hard. Instead of rationalizing why it happened or what you can do about it, is really important. And then later, once they're able to engage in the problem solving approach and looking at the pros and cons and what's best for them, you can reassure them, that sounds like a really good decision that you made. So again, this is about modeling and teaching emotion regulation strategies. So putting on that oxygen mask for ourselves as either staff members who work with kids, and we do work with our staff, but also as parents, to remember that when your kids are experiencing high volumes of stress or anticipation or worry, it's really important to model ways in which they can effectively cope with it. Another just point, to Cindy, what she was just saying is, good stressors and bad stressors, that when kids are experiencing sources of stress, we often think about it as a bad thing. But a lot of times their experience of the stress is because they care, because they want to do well, because their intentions are good. It's just they're not sure of how to navigate through it, getting to the other side and feeling like they're more competent and confident. So ways in which you can model and teach emotional regulation is by breathing. I know oftentimes when the beaker, I use an analogy of a beaker a lot of times with kids, when the beaker is percolating and the stress levels in the room are getting higher and higher, it's really important to take note and notice how you're breathing and what your body's telling you. And then to hit that pause button, which is really what mindfulness is about. It's being able to stop in the moment and take note of what's happening. Reframing is also a really important thing. Like not all stress is bad. And it's important even when you have negative emotions. Those negative emotions can be a catalyst for some goodness. positive self-talk. I think that's something when there is more competitiveness. Thank you, Susan, for pointing out Comparisonville. I always tell kids, you know, when they're comparing themselves to their friends or their siblings, that going into that town of Comparisonville, if you will, is a bad, bad place. It's a bad town. Don't go there. And I think that in this year of being juniors, it's really important for them to have an authentic journey of what's good for them, not necessarily what's good for others. Gratitude practice. There's so much research that shows that the more gracious and the more people can practice gratitude on a daily basis. And if you'll see in the background, I have, you know, a visual reminder to start each day with a grateful heart. I think that there's so much correlation between people who are able to be gracious and be thankful for even the smallest things, excuse me, in a given day, and to really look at what are the positives that are happening, even if it's big or small or it doesn't have to do with school, but just to recognize the things that can be sources of celebrations as opposed to sources of looking at failures. Imagery, you know, thinking about what are their happy places, what are your happy places. If you'll see in my background too, you know, the ocean, the beach, putting those visuals in your day, whether it's a word or a mantra that you can repeat each time that you're feeling that level of stress. It's really important to infuse some of that positive mindset. Changing the channel, like when you're getting into negative worry thoughts, being able to stop and kind of just radically accept that you may have to go in and take that test. You may have to sit for that SAT or the ACT test. And so what can you do to get through that? And changing it to my ability to sit there and to do the best that I can is going to help me in the future. It's a part of my journey. It's not the end all be all. And then also really kind of getting more attuned with what works for your kids. I often ask students, you know, I can come up with a list of coping skills, but what are some of the things that you're already using or things that you think could be helpful? Because a lot of times what kids are feeling is, mom or dad, you don't understand what I'm thinking or feeling, and you don't understand. I don't know if you've ever heard that. I've heard it once or twice from my daughter. And so that's a really good opportunity to reflect and say, you know what, maybe I don't, but you can certainly help me with that. So having those honest conversations. And so what are some of the other healthy methods that you can use to cope with stress?
More
Mm,
sleep. Yes, that would be nice.
yeah, more
Exercise and
sleep,
sleep.
exercise. Absolutely. Interestingly enough, too, the health teachers do, it's come up recently, do an exercise with the kids about, and they put a whole bunch of words up on the board, and they ask kids to pick the top three that they've been experiencing most recently, and tired is coming up, and it's an opportunity for them to talk to the kids about the difference between physical tiredness and emotional tiredness. And I think if you'll ask anyone on this panel and or in this webinar, you know, people feeling emotionally and physically depleted through everything that they've had to pivot to master and to overcome during the last couple of years has left us, you know, needing to be more mindful of that and make sure that now that things are up and running, sports and school and work and socializing outside, you know, there's more things on our agendas now, to really pull back and make sure that you're still taking time to refuel and regroup and reflect on what's important. Force social breaks on the weekend. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love it.
So another thing that I hope we've all learned through this pandemic is the need to, as Eileen said, pivot and really adjust our expectations, right? It's been a rough 18 months and or more, and we still aren't out of it. So I think, this is just a good time to just think about resetting those expectations. The comic here says, this is the real me really as I am. And then the other person is saying, how dare you not live up to my expectations? And I think we can all recognize ourselves in this. I certainly can, in terms of my own son, and high expectations are terrific, but we also have to have some room to understand what each child's strengths are and where their vulnerabilities are, and stay right with them in terms of what they're capable of, and listen to them and take time to understand where they are and who they are. So it's that idea of connecting to our kids, not expecting perfection. This is hard because we're a community that does drive ourselves hard, that has a lot of talents, and so it can be tough. But I think especially during the junior year, if I look back, I have to say with my 21-year-old, my big regret is probably not spending enough time connecting during that year and worrying too much about college admission. So I think that's a really important one. Letting go of the small stuff. Similarly, now I walk by an empty bedroom and I think, why was I so worried about all the clothes all over the floor, right? Let go of the little stuff. And really assuming good intentions. So often with all of us during this difficult time, and always, we may hurt somebody's feelings we didn't intend to. And so having that frame of mind and mindset where we're always looking at the best in somebody and understanding that the intention is good, even if the result was in some way hurtful. We talked a lot about Comparisonville already, but I think that is such an important one. A lot of research that depression comes from social comparison in adolescence, and with all the social media, that there is an uptick in that. So the more we can stay out of that and help our kids stay out of it, so important. And I think, again, adolescents are prone to have some black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. So that's another place where you can be helpful. It's I'm always stressed out, or you never do this for me, right? You never understand me. Taking a step back and helping them to see the gray in the world, and that it's not all or nothing, can also really help. We call that cognitive restructuring. You're helping them to be able to shift their mindset that it isn't always, it isn't nothing. And, adolescents do have a way of catastrophizing or globalizing and making everything big. So you can be that frontal lobe for them and help them slow it down and say, hey, I'm not sure it's quite as bad as you're feeling right this moment. I know it feels bad, but let's take a look at that. And lastly, in terms of expectations, sometimes I think the worst is the expectations we have of ourselves as parents. So I always find it helpful to think about that idea of a good enough parent that comes from a pediatrician, Winnicott, many, many years ago. But I held on to that a lot through parenting. We do our best, we love our kids, and that's what's important. And so we're going to mess up. We say we're sorry, we move on. We're not perfect, and that's okay. So hopefully you can work on those adjustments in expectations.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important, and follows up what we're talking about here in terms of keeping things in perspective. Even, some of the chat questions and stuff about, but we should take PSAT sooner. We should have done this way, or we shouldn't do it that way. It's okay. We have to keep everything in perspective. Any one little thing you're doing right now isn't affecting or impacting their future forever. And it's important to think about it in that way. Key here in terms of keeping it all in perspective is that you do have to talk to your child about things. They're not mind readers. They don't know what your expectations are. And sometimes just laying it all out on the table is very important. But not overdoing it. To lay out your expectations every day and every week is probably too much. Looking at their grade portal, the PowerSchool, every day and asking them about why something dipped or why they didn't do well on a test. You can be pretty sure that they're looking at that as well and feeling badly if they've done badly on things. So it's very important to just think about how often you're talking about things. Make a plan for when you're going to talk about college. We always say this, and you probably have already heard us say this, not to talk about it every day, maybe schedule every Sunday afternoon for 2 hours is the time you're going to talk about it, and you won't bring it up again. Could be the same way about grades. Let's talk about it every 2 weeks or every week and give your child a chance to work through some of the glitches in what they're doing on a uh, day-to-day routine. All of these things are very important for you to just be the organizer for them, not, you're always putting them in the forefront, giving them the skills to take charge of things, but they're in this stage of they're really afraid of how this is all going to work out. So they need your help in planning. So often in the second half of the year, we say that's a good time to visit colleges, but sometimes it's really difficult with athletic schedules and with other things that they're doing. So it's important to sit down with a calendar and say, okay, looks like we only have this weekend and that weekend or these 3 days. How are we going to make the best use of our time and create a schedule and make a plan and follow through? So often kids say, yeah, they said that we're going to go on college tours, but then life goes on and you don't get around to establishing those things. So a little planning and having you both look at a calendar to decide when you're doing what, it will help them to understand, the bigger picture and have a plan going forward. And then also a lot of these trips, that you're going to plan, they can be fun trips. You can plan a vacation in an area where they actually are interested in seeing some schools and make there be some fun parts to that too, that you're not just looking at schools and then racing to the next one and then talking about it. Throw in some other activities for them so that they get a sense of life, some normal parts of life too.
So creating an authentic experience with your child as you move through this journey is really important. I think somebody put in the chat before that comparing is the antithesis of joy. And it does, it really is it's something, going into that town of Comparisonville, only focusing on the competitiveness, what everyone else is doing or what the wrong or the right thing to do on this journey will really take the joy out of it. And it should be something, a journey that you guys can enjoy and really have some heart to hearts. I love this picture because I think sometimes, having a daughter, it really is comforting to her when things are hard to just give a big hug and to be silent and just allow the moment to be there and to pass where things can calm and then you can regroup. The goal is really for parents to set the stage for ongoing discussions, but to make sure that the student is in control of the agenda. And whether or not you agree with what they're doing or thinking or feeling, just being available to listen and find the right time to share what your feelings and thoughts are. The other thing is, as I said before, it's really important to praise the effort as opposed to the end result, because everybody's journey is different. And if you can find the little things to celebrate along the way, it's so important because it keeps it a more positive journey as opposed to something that's wrought with worry and fear.
And this is just a little trick that I learned along the way. It comes from something called collaborative problem solving in terms of talking to your kids when there is a difficulty. And this is for sort of in our best moments when we can be a responsive, not a reactive parent that I'm always shooting for. But let's say, for example, your student, you paid a lot of money for some test prep and they haven't touched the book. So you might want to scream, how ungrateful and how they're not doing what they're supposed to do and how they're not going to get into college, something like that, right? But no, we do take a breath. We do that, taking a breath. and start with empathy. So you might say something like identifying the child's concern. I noticed that you haven't really taken out that test prep book. Tell me more about that. It looks like it's not something that you've really felt like doing. So you're starting with their perspective. And then once you hear that, you can put in the adult concern, which is something more like, my worry is that you had a goal for yourself of wanting to increase your score and that you're going to feel kind of stressed if you don't get some of this done a little bit at a time, right? So you're putting out that piece that's the adult piece, and then an invitation to them, as we've been saying, to try to problem solve, not to problem solve for them, but to say, what do you think we can do about that? Let's say they said, well, I just don't have time. I've got too much on my plate. Okay, let's look at what's on your plate. What do you think you could do about that? Is there anything that we could take off to make some time? So again, helping them, starting with the empathy, really being able to identify the concerns and then let them come up with the solution.
And then, really important, spend time together and put that fun back in. It's really hard with adolescents at a certain point to find what was you used to connect with that worked well. For my daughter, it was always good to go shopping, that I'd get her attention. It might have cost me a little bit of money in junior year, but it did help us to stay connected on things that weren't about college and test prep and what are you doing now, and let's do this and let's do that in terms of their schedule of what they have to get done to move forward and never take a break. So whenever you can find time to do that, there are time, if you, and please, if anybody in the chat can help us with that, what kinds of things do you do as a family that still brings you back to those times when you're not asking anything of them, you're not talking about their grades, and you're just having fun together? What ways do you find to spend that time together? Looking for suggestions on that one.
Meeting movie nights, family dinners, movies, nail salon.
Oh, the nails, always a good one. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I asked the kids this once, what's your favorite TV night? Thinking back to our day when, Thursday night was what all the comedies were on and stuff like that. And these kids all looked at us like we had two heads, and they were like, well, it's always Friday night because that's when everything we recorded all week, we now watch it. And, but they all always pointed to that as really a nice time for the family. It's something they enjoyed.
I'm hearing dog park, playing with your animals, having calm, bowling, Sunday football, shooting baskets, so playing hoops. I know that was one for my family we did a lot of during COVID. My daughter asked me one night, she knows I went to UConn for undergrad, and she said, Mom, when you played for UConn, and I was like, whoa. I went to UConn, but I didn't play basketball for UConn. So it was the source of humor and, learning about each other. Like those are things that came out through those discussions that she never knew. Family game night, cards, watching a conflict resolution series like Star Trek, taking a walk or going on a hike, getting outdoors. That green time is essential. Ping pong, hikes, walks. These are all really important things.
Those are great.
Bike riding. I know we did a lot of bike riding. And I guess the point of all of this is really remembering that, while we were having that forced time together, I think it was a lesson to learn of how much more, even though times may have been stressful, but really the opportunities to connect and to learn about one another was really happening. And now the shift has kind of gone back to work mode and school mode and sports. And it's really important to infuse every week with that time to become more attuned with one another and to spend time together. Baking was another one that came up a lot, is, cooking or learning, and think about, in older generations before social media, how much time was spent teaching your children how to bake or cook or sew or do anything that was of mutual interest.
Yeah, you don't want to forget those because those are the memories you're building for your kids. And it does feel good when they talk about remembering those times when they're out of the house that was so important to them.
Yeah, and one other major one is laughter. I think that if there's any chance that you can, and I think we sometimes have to model that for ourselves when we mess up, is oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. And really, if you can get a good laugh out of it, and especially as parents, if you make one or two mistakes along the way, it's really good to like just say, to have a good laugh at it. And it's good for the heart.
Absolutely. And I think, we just wanted to kind of wrap up in terms of strategies with that last reminder about the oxygen mask and taking care of yourselves, because we know how stressful this is, not only on kids, but on parents, and to slow down and really take care. I think, especially with the COVID pandemic, people are exhausted. There is a sense of a long time that people have dealt with this, and what one of the New York Times authors called languishing, right? And that feeling of that it gets tough. So with that, ever more, we need to be focused on intentional strategies to manage emotions. So I know you heard a lot of these already. I'm not going to go through all of them. I think maybe what I do want to end on is certainly self-compassion. Again, parenting is so difficult. And even as someone who had a degree in child development, it's challenging, right? Kids know how to get to us and we react rather than respond more than we would like. But it is such a wonderful, wonderful journey. And I think that self-compassion and also the mindfulness, as Eileen said before, the definition of mindfulness is really staying in the moment, not in the past, not in the future, in the moment without judgment. And I think that kind of captures this period, right, where we really want to be connected to our kids and not lose this precious junior year to worrying so much about what is to come. I certainly think about that with my son, who I only see on vacations now. And, what a precious time it is, the junior year, with having that family time. So just wanted to leave you with those last suggestions.
And then just to wrap up, practical tips for keeping the peace, keep calm and carry on, recognizing and validating both your emotions and your child's, finding any opportunity to model and teach how to regulate your emotions, adjust expectations of yourself and everyone around you, always assume that people's intentions are good. Having clear expectations ahead of time. So any way that you can infuse planning where everyone has input into the plan is helpful. Creating those authentic experiences to just kind of, be heart to heart and to enjoy spending time together. Really using a collaborative problem solving model. Not solving the problem for your child, but teaching them this discrete skills in terms of looking at issues, weighing the pros and cons, coming up with the most reasonable or well thought out solution, and then implementing it. Making forced family time together. Noticing what's going well. I think that's a big one, is really thinking about, even in the most challenging times, what is the benefit of it? Taking care of yourself as a parent, and creating a network around you of people who can lift you up when you're not feeling so great. And having fun and really looking at this as a journey that you can enjoy in an adventure. And of course, maintain the laughter wherever you go, because that's so important.
All right. So, and of course, we are here for you, the team. So, Eileen, as a social worker, we have psychologists, we have our website, we have many, many programs moving forward. Sorry, Eileen, I took this over for you.
That's okay, Cindy.
In
Yeah.
terms of programs for junior parents and junior students, it's all coming up. So where we'll get to the nuts and bolts of things that are happening here. Anything else?
So I'm
Eileen?
seeing, so I'm seeing in the chat, can you clarify the various roles the panelists play at New Canaan High School? So I am one of the 2 school social workers, and we work collaboratively with all of the people on screen, your school counselors, the administrators, the school nurses, our school resource officer, students, and most importantly, parents. We truly, I use the word partner a lot because we truly are partners in this journey. We can't do it alone without you. School counselors, so school social workers work collaboratively with our school psychologists, particularly to look at the mental and emotional and academic well-being of students. So a lot of what we do is different than what private counselors would be doing, which is dealing more with a student's own personal journey and maybe some family issues. Our roles are really to make sure that all students have access to their education and are able to make progress, to engage in the classroom, to mitigate any social emotional difficulties that they may have that's impacting their education, and to make sure that they are fully engaged in the school setting, and having the opportunities to grow. School counselors, Sandy, if you want to talk to that, are more in terms of the academic and social emotional piece.
Right. I think when we keep the kid in context of the school and helping them navigate the school in terms of how they can achieve their goals based on their interests and passions, and help them to find those. We do a lot of planning around post-high school and their personal career goals and majors in college. We work with their academic programs and making sure they're well settled into their classes. But when it gets to a level of concern in terms of mental health, that's more on a therapeutic model. I think it goes to social workers and psychologists temporarily to then assess whether outside resources need to be taken and need to be thought about and considered.
Mhm. And we also have a new kids in crisis outreach worker, who is Greg Sloan. And so for kids whose emotional issues are maybe not affecting their academics as much, or they just want somebody to talk to within the school day, that he can be referred to through the school counselors. The way to access him would be through the school counselor. And is there any other questions that were in there? I mean, but really as you can see in this picture, we are a family outside of, our own families, and really believe in the power of parents and the power of students getting through the high school journey with success. And this picture here was from graduation during COVID, and talk about reframing how one sees things. We all were mourning the fact that we were maybe not able to get together for graduation, and having the parade that the town was involved in, and the school and the staff and parents and kids. It turned out to be one of the most memorable graduations that we experienced. So, even through the hardships of this journey with your juniors, remember there are definitely going to be things on the back end of it that you're going to look back on and be able to celebrate or reflect on, that our memories made throughout the journey.
And I'll just jump in and add, in terms of my role as a student support coordinator, that's a district-wide position that's really focused on working collaboratively with all of our social workers and counselors to make sure that our students are supported, and also initiating that emotional intelligence work and working with teams across the district to make sure that kids have those skills of self-awareness and self-management and social relationships and problem solving that we work on so much through our emotional intelligence work and positive school climate. So that's kind of the big picture for my role too.
Do we have any other questions out there as we wrap up today? Nothing?
No, I don't see anything new added. I would like to thank you all so much. I mean, I think after COVID and having our kids home so much and in their rooms so much, just handling this as juniors after they haven't been in the school as much since freshman year is a double challenge. So having you guys for support is great. And it's a wonderful resource for us. So thank you very much for your time today. All of our panelists, Cynthia Rivera, Eileen Donnellan, Susan Bliss, and of course, Christy Carrera. Thank you all for joining us today and helping us out with managing our students' stress and a little bit of our own as well.
Well, and
It's
please,
quite a year.
Keep reading the Ramagram and the guidance update for upcoming events, because for junior year, there are quite a few coming up. And we will meet with parents in January and then have individual meetings with their kids following that. We have Jeff Salingo in December. So a lot of things around college admissions that will be so informative for you. And even just having the knowledge will help calm you all down, I think. So let's look out for those things. We'll keep working
We sure will.
at it.
Yes,
And
and
keep
we'll
in
make
touch with your counselor.
right. And we'll make sure with the PFA that we are communicating all that information. So thank you so much. Well, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for
Thanks
joining
so
us.
much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.